What's up everyone, TechHero here. Today we're going to do a camera comparison between the Pixel 3 and the 4a 5G. In all tests, I did not tap to focus. I left it in auto mode and forced night sight on or off as needed. First, let's get the specs out of the way. Let's put some numbers on if you wanted to take a look. The selfie camera, you have a darker but wider sensor. With the rear camera, you get a slightly brighter lens. And for the ultra wide, instead of it being in the front, now it's in the rear and you get double the resolution. Here's a 4K 30 video from the Pixel 3. Looking excellent, if a bit jittery. And a 4K 30 video from the 4a 5G. This one's looking a lot more stable and a little bit brighter. A little bit more saturated than I remember. Here's a video dynamic range test at 1080p 30. And the same thing on the 4a 5G. This one's lifted the shadows a little bit. Here's a stabilization test, a little bit of a walk, and a short run. Okay, now for images. Here's a first shot with the Pixel 3 and the 4a 5G, both looking great. Here's a side-by-side where you can see the 4a 5G is slightly warmer, maybe has a magenta hue. Zooming in, you can see that the Pixel 3 looks a little bit sharper, especially close up. Notice that the 4a 5G focused out to infinity and the Pixel 3 did not. You'll find throughout the camera comparison that the 4a 5G tends to focus out to infinity a little bit more often. And here's the ultra wide. And the ultra wide on the 4a 5G, it's a little bit wider. And the side by side, you can see the cleaner color in the sky. And it's a little bit warmer on the 4a 5G. And this one does not have the magenta hue. And zooming in, you can see that the 4a 5G is a lot more detailed. The Pixel 3 just has 8 megapixels, whereas you get double that for the 4a 5G. A lot better image. Here's a shadow test on the Pixel 3 and the same image on the 4a 5G. Note again, the 4a 5G is focusing to infinity. Side by side, showing that we have a bluer sky on the Pixel 3. Dynamic range looks similar. Zooming in, level of detail is about the same. Pixel 3 is a little bit warmer. With the flower shot, colors are more pleasing on the 4a to me, looking at the sky. The fence is a little bit brighter as well. Here's a flare test on the Pixel 3. It seems a little bit more washed out, but the detail's great on both. And the same flare test on the ultra-wide lens. They've both maintained similar amounts of color. The 4a 5G has pretty dramatic flaring, and it's across the entire image. Here's a brick wall for distortions. It isn't ideal, I shot upward, but it looks like they are both doing similarly. Let's go into night shots. This is without night mode. This is a lot more yellow than I remember. And the 4a 5G is a lot more dramatic than I remember, but it has a much cleaner sky. Color temperature is somewhere in between as I remember, and the brightness was probably closer to the Pixel 3. The glare, however, is quite harsh on the Pixel 3. Upon zooming in, the noise pattern is very similar. The 4a 5G rendered a brighter and cleaner sky, but the level of detail is about the same. And this is with night sight on, which is looking a lot better. Same on the 4a 5G. And with them side by side, they are looking very similar. You can see that the 4a 5G lifted the shadows in the overhang and the brightness in the roof, and the detail in the fence is a little bit more clear on the 4a 5G. And here's another night mode image. This image is looking really good, with the exception of the glare. Now we move to the 4A5G. It's a lot warmer, but it doesn't have the glare issue. And with them side by side, they're looking very similar. I would take either one. They're both looking great. Until you zoom in and you find that the 4A5G looks much more soft across the entire image. I took this image twice just to make sure, and they look similar. And I believe this has to do with the newer f1.7 lens and its lens quality. This is probably one of the areas where Google cut corners. Here's a like button, and another like button, and two more like buttons. They're both looking really good. I don't know why the Pixel 4a 5G chose the settings that it did, probably user error, but when you zoom in you can see the nail on the Pixel 3, whereas you can't on the 4a 5G. Let's do an indoor portrait shot. Note that with the 4a 5G you can do portrait mode with night sight. With them side by side, they're both looking great. Cutouts looking very similar. But zooming in here, look at the texture loss on the 4a 5G. Even at very similar ISO settings, the focus seems a little bit different, but you'll find this is a recurring pattern, and I believe this is a lens hardware issue. On both Pixels, you get 8 portrait shots in 10 seconds. Check this out. Even without zooming in, you can see detail loss on the 4a 5G. And the 4a 5G has lower ISO and similar focus. When you zoom in, just to double check, yep, you get plenty of texture loss. Let's turn down the lights. The 4a 5G is more saturated than real life and has a red tint. Colors are more accurate on the 3. Zooming in, it's a little bit harder to notice in low light, but the stitching disappeared on the 4a 5G. Also, notice the 4a 5G doubled the shutter speed at the expense of ISO. This is something I've noticed in many indoor low light tests, whether night sight on or off. This tends to help if you have shaky hands taking photos, but will result in increased noise. I'm sure there's additional Google software that's helping, but just not enough. For astrophotography, I've taken a few shots, and each time the Pixel 4a 5G takes longer. For this shot, the Pixel 3 took about a minute, and the 4a 5G took 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And for some reason, the 4a 5G shows a 4.7 meter focus, but regardless, that image looks so much better on the 4a 5G. When I usually look through camera comparisons, I usually like to see the numbers, but I rarely do, so I wanted to start making these videos. It made me realize how many ways I or the camera can make errors that make the images incomparable. I hope this shines some light on hardware and software problems and gives you an idea of how hardware and software could work together and change over time. Let me know in the comments below if the 4a 5G is worth upgrading to from the 3 solely based on camera. For me, it's a toss-up with inferior main camera, but much better ultra-wide and features like cinematic pan and night portraits. If you guys find this useful, please like and subscribe. As always, have a great day.